All right. So everyone, welcome back to the second session of today, when we have a great speaker, Rania Sanford, who's executive coach with expertise working with early, mid-career, and late career professionals across various industries. Her experience spans over 2 decades of management and leadership roles at Stanford, leading and directing initiatives and programs that develop performance of organization, people, and services. Functional areas included recruitment, talent management, change, issue and crisis management, strategic communication, diversity and inclusion, and operations and budgets. So without further delay, Rania, off to you.
Thank you so much, Blas, and thank you for inviting me and welcome everyone. I hear great things about your group, and I look forward to spending this next 90 minutes talking about strategy, tactics, and spending some time in self-reflection related to how you might go about leading your groups in a time when there's a lot of change going on, ambiguity, and transformation in different ways. As Blas graciously made the introduction here, this is sort of gives a sense of who I am. I was trained as a coach at Columbia and also at the Center for Creative Leadership. I am in Silicon Valley. I've been living here for the last 25 years. I'm at Stanford University as an internal coach and an organizational development consultant. As well as, and I also have private clients in the Valley and major companies there. I'm a traveler and I love to do things like meditation, volunteer work, and also look at issues of raising teenagers in an era of iPhones, which is my most recent challenge here. I appreciate that everybody here is coming from different parts of the world, and I too came from a different country than the United States. I grew up in Egypt and I've traveled many countries. I have 2 continents left on my bucket list, and then I will have checked them all off, and I can't wait for that to happen soon again. So that's about me. Since this is a virtual class, I just want to sort of set up some sort of baseline expectations about being here together in this space. So removing distractions, the participation, which I hope you all embrace pretty vividly, turning your cameras on. There'll be a lot of conversation and opportunities for breakouts. So be ready to respond and contribute. I'd also like to ask to keep the confidentiality of some of the things that may come up. So to try to keep them within this group as much as you can, and to keep the accent on the positive. So what are we going to accomplish today in this big topic of management strategies in the current times? Well, what I'll do is I'll share with you frameworks, ideas to think about how to build and lead resilient and innovative groups, and also how to approach collaborations across functions, across people in organizations, maybe with different motivations, different interests. So we'll spend some time talking about these frameworks, and I really liked what you did last day one with the focus on emotional intelligence. I thought that was a great way to start, and I listened to that talk, and I could see, your focus in that talk was on, strategies that are more at an individual level, like cognitive reframing, thinking about your triggers, emotional triggers, and how those affect your own behaviors. What I'll do in our time together is shift the focus from the individual to the group, and your role as a sort of a process leader in leading a group to become emotionally intelligent as the group being the unit, and how to do that well. So that would be kind of the overarching approach we're doing here. So I have been at Stanford for many years. It's a very large research enterprise that's about $6.6 billion. There is nearly $2 billion come from outside sources just to do research. It's a very innovative environment, very rich, not just in money, but also in talent and ideas. So it's a very innovative place. And there are many, many lessons to be learned from how such a place runs. But it's both science and an art to lead innovation in groups like that. So what I'd like to sort of start by asking you, when you think of the word innovation or innovative teams, what comes to your mind? And I'd like you to use maybe the chat and just throw in the words that come up for you when you think about innovation in teams. What do these teams look like? What are the behaviors? And so on. So take a minute and use the chat for that. Open mind for change, curious. What else? Out of the box thinking, so creativity, new ideas, they're open to try new things. Yep. Bold, ambitious. Yeah. So being driven, co-create, build on others' ideas, work together. Mm-hmm. Not afraid to fail. That's a great point. And we'll spend some time talking about psychological safety, and learning from those failures is also a big part of the second part of that. So learn, not afraid to fail, learn and try again. Yeah. Yeah. These are great suggestions and ideas. And this is exactly what innovation is and looks like in practice, right? It's all these things. It's about communicating clearly, about out of the box thinking and carrying things through. So not just having the great idea, but also knowing how to go about implementing it, failing, trying again, failing again, being open to change. So maybe the initial idea may not be the idea at the end, but some modification, some version of that. So that's exactly what this is. So, you know, adaptation is sort of one way to think about it. Reframing is like how to think of adaptive behaviors. And you're in an industry that goes through a lot of transformations all the time, right? There is a great book that actually just came out by Columbia Business School, but actually Raj Dada, he's an acquaintance, and he lives here, not far from me. This book, he's a CEO of one of the companies here in the Valley, and he wrote this book that's now made it to the #4 book on the Wall Street Journal bestsellers book. So he's quickly, the book is quickly made it up. So I highly recommend it. I read it recently, and it talks about the story of adapting to a new environment. He talks about B2C and B2B digital transformations and how to relate those two functions relate to customers and the customers of today, right? So he talks about immediacy, accuracy, the need for high precision in a B2B environment, how to leverage AI and digital experiences for customers, which is, how about to create familiarity, and how these are a little different from a B2C environment. So I bring it up to you because I know this is your area, doing supply chain, but I also, I highly recommend the book for you to look at. But he talks about a story of adaptation, and I think innovation really requires a very adaptive approach to work and to life in general. What does that adaptation look like? Well, it requires resilience, and it requires being able to have a vision and bouncing back. So where are your people? Like, how are you doing? We've been through a pandemic. We're at the tail end of it. This is a huge experiment for us as humans to undergo adaptation, to keep things going and keep life moving forward under new circumstances. So when you think about the past year and a half, and you think about your own work groups, what strengths could you now identify as a result of that experience in the last year and a half? And where do you see opportunities now going forward, now that the pandemic is at the tail end and we may be going to some version of the old normal, maybe not entirely exactly the same, but some version of it. So where are your people? Where do you see your groups lie in terms of process? Yep. Just you can step in and share. Where you don't have to use the chat for that. So Franco suggested, mentioned, flexibility and agility. Franco, could you elaborate a little bit on that? What you saw happen behaviorally on the ground as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think we were very fast adapting our way of working. Just, like from one day to the next, we were working from home and supporting the operations. Like I think we did a very good job.
That's good. Excellent. So what made it work very good? What made it a very good job? What were if you think about the leader behaviors there, what made it happen like that?
I think the communication that was coming from our ABI leadership was extremely strong. Especially, I don't know if people remember back to March and April of 2020, like we were having weekly cascades from the leadership and stuff on things that ABI was doing around the world, the status of all the countries, and then where we were supporting local communities, et cetera, with hand sanitizers. Since when we make alcohol, right, we can easily adapt, and with mouth masks and stuff like that. So I would say the communication within our company was very positive for me personally.
And also sharing the best practices, right? So what we had last year, it's really a global pandemic, and then we could learn what happened in certain parts of the globe, right? What happened in China, later in other countries. So then we, as Daniel mentioned, it was super fast to share information, keep people up to date, and then of course I think also the diversity, right? People have different mindset, different experience, how they respond and come up with ideas. I think this part worked very well.
I think our culture also helped a lot. We have the saying "challenge accepted," right? So this was a very big one that was thrown on us. We accepted and we dealt with it, I think, in a very proficient way. I also think, honestly, let's say the financial, how do you say that, performance, right, or rigor. We had certain, we're a very lean company, so that came in very handy. When you go through a challenge like that, we didn't directly needed to go to laying off people or things like that, which worked for us, was very well, and we see it now. That it's bringing the value, right? Because we kept, let's say, everybody on board and the strategy the same, and we're taking the benefit from that now that the results are really going in a positive swing.
Yeah. So the behaviors that you described were communicating well, being quick and resourceful, leveraging each other's resources and expertise, right? Experiences, and all these were kind of coping ways, right? Good coping ways. So there are they talk about resilience in two ways, right? The ability to sort of bounce back, like cope with a new circumstance and bounce back from it, and then adapt as well, adaptation, right, in behavior. So we kind of sometimes get stuck when we try to keep the same habits while we're dealing with different questions, right? And the adaptation requires us to actually change our habits too, in order to deal with the different questions. So it sounds, this is how innovation is made, right? Like shedding some old way of thinking and embracing a new frame, a new way of approaching a new question altogether. In research, we talk, we talk about, you need to learn what kind of question you want to ask, right? That's a big part of the success, is knowing what questions to ask and having a new vision.
To make one comment before you pass. So I think for me it was resiliency, as you said, adaptation, but also learning, because I think we can isolate things that we learned within this environment. Hopefully this environment will not extend too long, but there are some things that we learned that we can use in the new normal minus COVID environment.
Yeah. And that learning is what's going to make your groups sort of intelligent, right? The collective intelligence from the group is kind of having the time to sort of sit down and reflect on isolating these elements that you learn, the new realities, the new knowledge that you have. I think, I don't know if you already do that, but this is something I would definitely think about and create space for within your groups. To sort of harness that moment and make the most of it, right? So that again, that's the resilience. And this is how you go about, leading, collaborating for innovation and resilience, is creating these spaces for these conversations, these reflections, and for these conversations to happen. I don't know if any of you recognize these people, but these are your colleagues at ABInbev. So
in Europe,
okay, someone knows, yeah. Okay.
It's the old procurement team, no?
Yeah.
With Nico.
Yes, procurement.
For whatever reason.
A few people left already, right? Richard White's there.
I would even say maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
My guess is
Yeah.
3.
And van der Water in the back there.
Does anybody see him? Nobody sees themselves there, do you? No.
No.
Okay. No. All right. Okay, so you make the company. You are the company. So how to do that? So I'll share with you some more things related to kind of how we approach new environments, right? And this was way before pandemic hit. This is Amy Edmondson, who I'll reference a few times in this talk. She talks about different things, but one of the things she talks about is innovation in teams. She studies that. She's at the Harvard Business School. But she describes these environments in these terms, the VUCA environments, the volatile, the uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? Rapidly changing with ups and downs, the unpredictable events that get introduced, big ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal and the supply chain is disrupted for many, many weeks. Conflict erupts in different parts of the world, again, changes, suppliers, resources, new events come up. So change the priorities to make life more complex, and also ambiguity around the environment. So having new signals or miss signals altogether too, not just new ones, but also signals that we miss. And then we also don't know how to evaluate. So how to lead in these environments. She talks about it. She has a few books. One is The Fearless Organization. And her biggest thing is about how we can create psychological safety, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But in these VUCA environments, the process of leading is about what you just described: frequent communication. It is very disruptive for leaders to deal in these environments, because we're used to leading by creating a vision, like this is our vision, this is our goal, let's get there, right? This is the traditional leader approach, right? And you talked about servant leadership as one frame. In challenging times in a VUCA environment, the process of leading is about creating optimism and creating a sense of possibility. The vision sometimes is not clear at all, right? We don't know, right? The leader cannot with confidence say, we're going to come out of this alive, right? Or they cannot say, we're going to hit our targets this year or this quarter. But what they're capable of doing is create optimism for their followers. And this is what leading is about during these kind of challenges. So it becomes more of a people thing. It's no longer about the bottom line. It's not about the data. It's about people and teams. And in the next hour or so, we'll talk about different ways to tackle this. One is how we approach teamwork, how we approach collaboration, and how we handle our emotions. And these are very, great books that I love. I'm sharing here with you. One is by Amy's, one of her earlier works, Teaming to Innovate. Adam Kahane talks about in his book. It's a very famous book. He's a mediator. He does large-scale country type, conflict resolution. He talks about collaboration, and the book's title is a pretty provocative here, collaborating with the enemy, but it's really talking about collaborating with people with completely different motivations or interests and how to do that well. A very interesting framework. And then the fun read here is Mama's Last Hug by Franz de Waal. It talks about primate behavior, very social behavior, and the emotions, the collective kind of emotions, and how emotions kind of shape us. Shape our behavior. So I highly recommend those 3 books, and we'll reference them as we go. So if you think, now moving over to thinking about collaborations, so this is a big part of innovations, to think across differences, think together with people who are different from you, as you all said. So we're going to be tackling collaboration in the next part of this workshop, and I would like to sort of think about collaboration as a great idea, right? We all love to collaborate. We all like to sort of work together. We're pro-social for the most part, but there are always barriers. We always feel like, oh, this is not going to happen. This is just impossible. You may be worn out. You may have other factors come into play. So what are these factors? What kind of barriers get in the way for you to do effective collaboration, either as an individual or as a representative or a leader within your group, for your group to collaborate with another? So I'd like us to spend a few minutes talk about this, and maybe small groups of 3, and then we'll jump in, we'll hear back, report back, and then talk a bit more about how to approach collaborations and some ideas there. So any questions or any thoughts before we break you into the groups? So we'll randomly assign you and think about the barriers related to.
Okay, I'm opening them up.
Thanks, Blas.
Of course.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Was that enough time?
No, yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. So what kind of report outs would your groups like to share with the broader crowd here?
I can share. I have the different points that we discussed. I was with Lawrence and Danielle, and we aligned that the main blockers are lack of prioritization, lack of time and resources, unnecessary escalations, misaligned target settings, and politics with the stakeholders.
Okay, which is a fact of life. Can't escape politics.
Yeah.
You have 2 people in a room, you have politics. All right, thank you for that. Other barriers other groups might have identified, or any agreement or disagreement with those barriers? See a lot of nodding heads and smiles, which tells me there's some resonance there, but let's hear from the rest.
We talked about a lot of the same things, and some kind of different ones also, like communication, silos, right? When you're not talking between departments, and then things like time zones, physical location differences, stuff like that can be barriers, right? Because you maybe don't even have a chance to talk with each other because you're 12 hours apart.
Yeah. So some of them are barriers that are really facts of life, like time zones or geographical limitations, right? Like this is.
Yeah, it could be.
It's something out there. What to make it a barrier or to treat it as not a barrier, it becomes how we approach it, right? It could be, so in the approach too. Other barriers to collaboration.
Maybe I could add from our team, because we also was thinking the first which pop up is what like the same objectives, targets, resources, whatever. But even if you have the same targets, all resources are there, whatever, sometimes you simply could not collaborate good because you could not communicate in the right way. You could not understand each other. Like it might be because of the culture difference. You're looking on the same things differently. or it might be because you have limited view on the business, on the topic from your angle or from your department perspective, and you do not see the full picture. You try to collaborate in the best way and to reach what the team want to reach, but you simply could not, because you do not have the full view of what is happening. So maybe the right answer how to eliminate it, it's to be better communicator. But we see quite often it happens, even if the same targets, objective, resources, whatever. But we simply do not understand each other in certain moments.
Yeah. Now, do you have processes that address some of these points? You know, whether it's communication around different backgrounds or perspectives, or the prioritization. To what extent do you, as a company, or even in your smaller ecosystems within the company, have processes to try to work on around these issues? How would you judge that or describe that?
Partly we have also cultural trainings. And then we have a project with a different zone that we get more information how people from that zone react on certain topics. That's helpful. We try to align our targets, but this is very difficult because different zones have different interests from the target setting point. So you do not get always an alignment. So the time zone impact is really very difficult to mitigate. So that's always, I would say, one of the biggest challenges, that the overlap we have is not the biggest.
Is it important to try to address some of these issues? Does it affect your work or affect the bottom line or your own success?
I think it does. I don't think that we have like a formal anything like formal other than leadership trainings and the likes to address things like we are listening more to answer than to understand. It sometimes is difficult to see when in conflict what the other side is not 100% wrong. At least it's 10% right, and it's difficult for us to see the rightness on the other position and to try to synthesize. So for me, it would for sure drive more collaboration, more efficacy, better results. Right? But I don't see us self-reflecting that much in that regard.
I mean, it sounds like that could be one way to tackle it. So I'll talk a little bit about approaching collaboration with the enemy, right? Like, with someone who's so different. I mean, coming from that, we'll talk about Adam's work a little bit, but there is a very important kind of prerequisite for it to happen. So let me I'll share the slides again and share a little bit about sort of the barriers that often come into play when it comes to kind of thinking about collaboration. And there are kind of two levels of barriers. Some of them are the individual level, right? Perceptions and realities. Time zone is one, different lack of alignment, right? This is more organizational, but in terms of individual level, perceptions around like failure may not be an option for me. I'm not going to collaborate because I cannot risk failing. Or I'm not going to collaborate because I could lose my job over it, right? I have to sort of toe the line, be safe, and not risk a collaboration that could cost me my job or my role or my bonus. Or also perceptions around, it's harder for me than it is for the other person, right? And it's always, we can go there easily when we're trying to work across with someone who's different from us, whether by background, by language, culturally, location. There's always this, I have it hard. It's harder on me than it is on the other person, right? So that kind of perception that can get in the way of productively collaborating. Other perceptions that also can get in the way around, like, they're out to get me, Resources are limited, which is something you mentioned. You know, we don't have the resources to do it well. Lack of resources, lack of prioritization, or my boss doesn't like me. You know, I'm not gonna be able to proceed here. I'm not gonna collaborate because just they're not gonna support me on this, or they're gonna, you know, my boss is not gonna give me that assignment or that opportunity. There is self-talk also that can, individual level, that can get in the way of people collaborating. You know, seeing signals from the company as interpretations that translate into self-talk. So when you get no as an answer often, it could, after a while, it becomes, okay, I'm being blocked, right? It becomes a personal thing and a hang up, rather than seeing it as, maybe there's something wrong with my approach. My idea needs to be vetted a little differently. I need to present it differently. But it can translate into this other, more destructive, you know, counterproductive self-talk that can really get in the way of collaborating, working with someone. Also, I'm not being understood is another one, very, again, common in kind of a global company like yourself, like you are, you know, working across differences. This is not what I signed up for. I was wrong to trust this person, all this lack of trust, or sort of self-defeating thinking, and no one will buy into this. I'm not going to propose this idea. I'm not going to pursue it, or I'm not valued, or what I contribute. So these are all in kind of common individual barriers to collaboration. Another very important one that we need to remember as we enter into a collaboration is to abandon the sense that we need to control the collaboration. Abandoning the sense of control, like being accepting of the fact that we may not actually own the outcome. It may not be the outcome we want, but it is about working across function or someone different in order to get to a different reality, create a different experience at the end of the collaboration. This is what we're after. So abandoning control is important. There are also collective barriers to collaboration. We talked about organization, talked about lack of resources again, unnecessary escalations. These are all behaviors, the politics, these are all behaviors that kind of render collaborations a little bit harder to accomplish. But there are other things too, and this is what we'll talk about, is psychological safety, which is the safety to participate, you know, that the fact that, you know, and Amy Edmondson talks about sort of what this idea of, call it temporal immediacy, like if it's safe for me to say something now, I'll say it. If it's not safe, I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut, right? Because it's not safe right this minute. So for you as a leader, you want to think about how you can prevent that barrier from taking hold, right? Like for people to feel free to participate, right? Which basically feeds the psychological safe culture that that's a really prerequisite. So a lot of the literature now, a lot of the practices around leading and management, where I sit in the Valley, or, you know, even more broadly in the US, really is addressing some of these levels of leadership, right? It's not about the data, it's not about strategy as much as it's also about the people. How can you create the culture, the psychologically safe place, and how to do that. So this kind of builds well on what you did before in terms of emotional intelligence, and we'll sort of unpack that a little bit more. So for the individual, a psychologically safe place is the ability to speak up without risking being rejected, humiliated, or punished for that. And for the team, which is, again, what I'd like us to sort of focus on and look at things with the team lens, is the process by which new ideas are encouraged and failures are learned from. So psychologically safe groups are more innovative groups, just as we also know that diverse groups are more innovative groups. The research on diversity tells us very clearly that diverse groups like you are more creative because you come with different perspectives. You're able to innovate better. Your process to get there is slower and could be, a little bit troubled because you come from such different perspectives, different approaches to the problem. So it takes longer to get to the end result, but the quality of the product, the quality of the end result is better than more homogeneous groups that actually are faster because they're more homogeneous. They don't spend a whole lot of time on process. So that's the kind of the catch on that. Now there are, further on Edmondson's work. I mean, there are different kinds of psychologically safe or not safe environments in relation to the level of demands or of the goals that those environments require from their people. So if you have, you can see here on this continuum, the higher the psychological safety and the higher the goals, you're going to find yourself in a learning space where you're safe to express yourselves, your team members are safe to talk about their work. They focus on collaboration, high performance outcomes. You talk about learn from failure. This is the learning zone. This is the optimal zone, right, for innovation and for moving forward. If the goals are high, but the environment is not safe, that's anxiety provoking, right? There's a lot to be done. There's a lot expected of me, but I'm not safe to speak up, or there are no mechanisms for me to speak up. The priorities are unclear, or I don't know if what I'm going to say is going to be aligned with the company's direction, or I don't know if I'm going to say is going to land well politically. These are all anxiety provoking kind of thoughts that would be leading anyone to be fearful of offering ideas, even tentatively, and also or asking for help. If when the environment doesn't have high goals, but is very safe, then it's very comfortable, right? Like, no demands, just doing my thing. It's enjoyable. There's no challenges. Sometimes not much hard work is going on. A lot of the small businesses tend to be in that space, very safe psychologically, but also the goals, the demands aren't very high. Like mom and pop shops or family-owned businesses tend to kind of fall into that comfort zone. But if the demands are low and the safety is also low, then the environment is cultivating apathetic behaviors. People wouldn't care. People clocking in and out. They're doing the bare minimum. They're joking for positions, right? Caring more about title, for example. People just do their little job, no more. There's no stretch. Nobody's willing to go the extra mile. And the environments like that tend to also have a lot of the favor exchanges. So I'm going to do this for you. You're going to do this other thing for me. So it's very much, it can end up being very relationship based, which could be counterproductive for the greater good of a corporation. A lot of bureaucracies find themselves there, or companies that are very large find themselves there. Is any of this, do you see yourselves in these quadrants, or do you see some parts of your company of ABInbev in here? Or any thoughts on this?
I think we want to be in the learning zone, right?
Yeah.
You want to be here. Yeah.
I'm afraid sometimes we are in the anxiety one, honestly. So we jump a bit back and forth.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Or apathy zone sometimes too.
Yeah.
It keeps changing, right? It's not.
I think it can be everything. Yeah.
You and all of them?
I mean, for sure, we are not in the comfort zone.
Yeah, I also want to make this remark. Look, no one mentioned that we are in the comfort zone.
But it's very interesting because all of us here in this group, it's part of our daily job to eliminate barriers, to ensure a good collaboration, because it's part of our job. It's really, and indeed, it's not so easy to find in this matrix where we are. We can be in several blocks here.
Is it
but it's really a key topic for us. It's a key topic. We have to deal with two parties within the same company. But we need to find the best collaboration between two parties with conflicting interests sometimes, and that's the problem. That's the difficulty.
What has worked well for you so far?
I don't know.
Good people.
Good people.
that want to be in the learning zone.
Yeah.
I think going back to Saf's point, what I was thinking as you show this is, I think now we are, for me, 70% in the anxiety zone and 30% in the learning one. I think COVID changed the mindset and we entered into a crisis mode mindset. I don't think we've gotten out of it. So things tend to be very stressful. Everything gets escalated. So I feel it more down to the right than upwards, than like northeast, in my view. And what for me has worked is when we align on expectations and say, okay, this can be done, this cannot, and then we sort of ease that pressure, we end up doing better than what we expected. But when we don't, anything that we do will be like bad perceived, or perceived badly, because you didn't, sometimes because of that anxiety, we could overpromise and underdeliver. And I think we can change the narrative a little bit, aligning expectations, prioritizing more. That at least that's what I'm seeing that we're doing more very recently, I think.
Do you, Jose and Lawrence, actually, do you see it as international team, like the group here, or broader international in the anxiety zone, or the company overall? Because I would disagree that our team doesn't, I feel like if anybody says it feels comfortable to say an idea, they just say it.
When I assess collaboration, I would say it more as a company, or if you want, overall supply organization, maybe. But that's a fair point.
I agree with you. I think we as a team are in the learning zone as much as possible, right? I'm not saying all the time, but yeah, when it's with neighboring teams, sometimes it doesn't really work.
Yeah, interesting.
Or you get into that anxiety zone. It's not the fear of offer attentive ideas, but it's just conflicting interest, right? Which leads to non-collaborative behavior.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And it could be that we as an international team, we are like more advanced than the rest of the organization.
Yeah, for sure. I tend to think so. In terms of collaboration, I really believe so. I worked in the zone, right? Who else? A lot of people here worked in the zone. For me, when I was working there, it was much less collaborative. Also because it was much bigger, right? That doesn't help. Because you have thousands of people working in the zone, right? While we are a team of, in total, what, 200 people, 150, something like this. So I'm not counting our both teams, right?
It goes to Zav's point perfectly, right? We have to be, right? Or else we completely fail. I mean, our whole job is speaking to one zone to make something happen for a different zone.
Exactly.
I kept on thinking is that sort of unites us, right? So the environment in a way unites you. It's a way of saying it.
I agree.
Common enemy, if you will, unites you. But not enemy. But
who's the common enemy, Jose?
Now we are in trouble, right?
Now we got to know.
At this point,
so Jose, that's a great reframe, right? Like, what is our shared interest here? And this is. We're not going to go into negotiation, but it is a negotiation skill. And I don't know if you have negotiation in your program, but there are workshops. I do give a workshop on negotiation, and it's a whole frame of negotiation that's called interest-based negotiation, which is the idea that, you find that common ground, whether it's an enemy, whether it's something else, right? That you are both shared and negotiate based on that, rather than sort of the traditional approaches to negotiation around like positions, right?
Yeah,
like this is my position, this is your position. How do we compromise? It's a win-lose frame versus a win-win frame. Interest-based are usually a win-win. It takes longer, but you get to again better outcome.
There is a famous book, Getting to Yes, by the Harvard Negotiation Project, right? And I think I'm just going to paste it in the chat because I think it's absolutely a fantastic book.
Yeah, Getting Yes is definitely one of them. It's a classic in that space.
It would help us to get more yeses.
Yeah.
Well,
instead of no's.
It depends how much violence you are ready to to subject your.
Yeah, well, these are all, the thing is, these are all learned skills. Like, and if you didn't have the opportunity to practice them as you do, you would never develop them. So another reframe, Jose, if I were to add to yours, is that these are great opportunities to flex your muscle and stretch, right? And try new things, again, which goes back to the whole thing about safety, but it's a good experience that you're developing here. So the group processes, sort of, that kind of takes us into sort of the worksheet. I'm gonna jump a few slides and talk about the idea of stretching for collaboration, and then we'll go back to the group processes worksheet, which was, by the way, put in the chat for you to open up and work on in the breakouts that will follow. But you know, we mentioned the idea of control, abandoning control, which Adam Kahane talks about as the primary almost prerequisite to enter into a collaboration with the enemy, so to speak. But he really talks about, like, kind of, there are three stretches one has to make in order to enter a collaboration and be successful in doing that. One is as a mindset going into it, and if you don't see yourself as part of the problem, you cannot be part of the solution. So owning part of it is number one. And the traditional collaboration mindsets are really can be mistakes. You know, the problem isn't with me, you know, it's always with someone else, right? They have to change. I am right. That approach, which sort of ties back to the sort of this fixed versus growth mindsets, or win-lose mindsets compared to growth mindset. Carol Dweck at Stanford, she's a psychologist. She talks about fixed and growth mindsets. Fixed mindset, when we have a very fixed idea, right? Like going into a situation that you are what it is. This is what it is. There's no space for you to rethink the situation in new terms, whether there could be new data coming in that could introduce a new perspective. Our own biases, when we have a fixed mindset, we kind of ignore that data. So it's also kind of interplays with this very famous idea that is also now very much part of the discourse around management, this idea of implicit bias, right? It biases our thinking because we're implicitly thinking of what's right. So we miss information. We completely don't see it. We miss the signals or the data or evidence to the contrary, right? So it's a big collaboration mistake to kind of adopt that kind of fixed approach. Another collaboration mistake is think that the collaboration is not going to work because we don't come from the same place. We're not motivated the same way. See, I'm motivated to have money, make money, and you're motivated to have more time with your kids. We think that these are two different motivations, so we cannot possibly collaborate on a hard project or difficult or demanding project, right? That's another traditional collaboration mistake. Seeking one universal ideal, also one outcome, one desired outcome as the truth is another collaboration mistake. So strong collaborations that are successful and are difficult often come in without knowing really what the outcome will be. And being open, again, goes back to the growth mindset, being open to the possibilities of a scenario that wasn't thought of, right? I'm gonna just close my window because there is work outside. It's the benefits of working from home here. Okay, so one of the, and kind of an example, it's not a corporate or business example, but it's very much, I think, might bring it to life for you, this idea of a one universal ideal. One of the most intractable conflicts in the world is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as you probably heard of. It's been around for nearly 60 or 75 years. it has not been solved, and the world has gone through wars and ended wars, and this is still going on as a very deep conflict, because there is one ideal that each party is holding on to, and there is not an approach to enter expecting or wanting to accept a third possibility, right? And that's making the collaboration quite impossible. It's made it created a mistake for it to even happen, right? So it's not happening. On the other hand, within that same frame of that particular political conflict, the Oslo Agreement, which was reached, I think, about 30 years ago, the early negotiators who came in to negotiate the Oslo Agreement, which created the Palestinian territories, if you're politically aware, they came into negotiation in a sort of a secret house in Europe. I don't remember where, I think somewhere in northern Scandinavia, and they entered not knowing what the outcome will be. So they did not come in beholden to a particular ideal, right? But what they agreed on, both sides, which ultimately led to the agreement at the end, the Oslo Agreement at the end, they came in knowing that the current situation was not possible, like it was not tolerable. They both wanted out of the current situation, and they were both open to exploring what the outcome might be. That was a successful collaboration. So there are it's important way to think about collaborations and kind of with these mindsets going in, right? And the biggest derailers is when we sort of decide not to collaborate because we hit a dead end, right? Walking away. And another derailer is sort of not having a good balance between being assertive and being engaging. And these are the two big drives that really is sort of the first stretch, is how to use both modes, being assertive and engaging, in order to get the collaboration going. So assertion being kind of a way of conflict. It's about what I want, what my position is, what I need. It's a lot of I statements, which sometimes, if it's by itself, could lead to conflict. But also embracing the connection that comes from engaging, like the power to the drive to sort of create a unified expression and engaging, something that, caring for people, empathy, understanding where they're coming from, and being engaging with that. So there was kind of being able to use both modes in an alternating ways makes collaboration move forward. If one is overpowering the other, it's a misplaced use of power or love or the connection, right? So knowing when to be assertive and knowing when to show empathy is what's going to carry the day, and the balance, again, alternating and use them in balance, usually half and half the time is there, half the time is there. I've seen many leaders who are very high on their emotional intelligence, very high empathy, that use the power, the drive of caring and love about 85% of the time. They are very ineffective in collaboration because it's actually quite frustrating for someone else to work with them, even though they're very caring people, but they're just not assertive enough to get things done. And I've seen the flip side of that. I've seen leaders who are very assertive. They're just stating their position. They want things done that way. They lose people all the time. People cannot stand them anymore because people see themselves as sort of tokens in their hand or as being used or abused by them. So it's very important to kind of balance the two sides. So that's the first stretch in collaboration, is the balance of both power and love. The second one, which goes back to the idea of innovation in a very powerful way, is the idea of experimentation, wanting to go in, not knowing exactly what could be the outcome, but talking and creating spaces for the dialogue is the sufficient place to start, right? And I agree sometimes that the best outcome may not be the most desired outcome. So learning from failures, again, maybe it could be something new. 3M has this famous company in the US that, there's a big story, that people talk about, with the Post-it notes like these. The actual sticky on the back of the Post-it note was not invented by design. It was a mistake. It was a product mistake. It was a botched product that created, it was supposed to be permanent. And the product was, the glue was botched, and it created the sticky that sort of, you know, is not a permanent stick. It ends up, it's one of the most successful stationery products in the world, you know, from a failed product. So embracing that outcome as success is sort of the leveraging the failure. So that's the reframe around mindset there. The third stretch is how to step into it, and that requires some emotional capacity on your part, on the part of your group. So how to do that? You want to do that through a process, right? Through a way by which you're able to create awareness, emotional awareness in your groups, and also some mechanism to regulate that emotion. I mean, I think in the talk you had on EQ, on EI, they talked about, the presenter talked about emotional intelligence being a big marker of leader success, which is true. Emotional intelligence of groups of people are big markers of innovation success. And this is done through a process. So these processes involve these two sides. You know, one is, first of all, to be aware of what's going on emotionally within the group. And then the second is how to regulate it, what to do about it, what to do with that data. So in terms of awareness, creating spaces, again, does the group evaluate itself? Does the group know where it stands? Does the group seek feedback? Is it open and safe environment to ask for help and give feedback? These are all awareness building steps. The regulation part comes from creating resources to talk about and get support, to cultivate an affirmative environment. So a can-do attitude, knowing that people watch each other's backs, and then being proactive about solving problems. So again, approaching failure as opportunities and learning from it. Some PR firms have the mistake of the month board. So you have the success of the month board and then the mistake of the month board. Again, we talked about the 3M story. Some mottos in companies go like, you know, fail often so you'll succeed sooner. You know, so to kind of promoting the continuous attempts and to experiment. So these are all part of that. So there is a worksheet that I'd like you to sort of work on. But before we go to that worksheet, perhaps we can spend a moment here to discuss some of what I've just shared so far and get your reactions and thoughts on it. It's not always accessible. It's not always very easy to talk about emotions in groups in a sort of methodical way.
I think in general that when it comes down to the awareness, right? It's always I always find out is that even if I think is something is wrong, I always ask the question, why it was done this way? What actually led to it? Just because I might be actually totally right about my initial assessment, but I think that asking this first question and just trying to understand why things were done a certain way, even if I think that they were done wrong, is a very big and very strong strong way to look into some of those problems.
Yeah. And sometimes it comes not from a place of deficiency, but how did you think I did? Or would you have done it differently? Or what another question would be, what worked well for you here in this case? Tell me what worked well. What did you like the most about this? So it'd also be about reinforcing self-evaluation, the positive light, reinforcing good behaviors as well. But that's a great point, Russ. Yeah. So the worksheet that we put in the chat for you has very specific questions related to both categories. And what I hope we can do maybe is break you into groups, but take some time, download the sheet and type on it. pick one or two of the big, it's a list of questions, 3 pages long. You can spend time working through it. But it talks about behaviors that cultivate both awareness and regulation in groups, right? And think about the groups you're a member of, whether it's the country group, the functional group, or any other group that you work with as an employee, and think about the behaviors that reflect each of these indicators of or areas, and think about it in terms of what is the behavior, and if it's not there, if it's absent, could something be done to start doing it, and what does that look like? So does that sound like a reasonable thing to ask you to do in the next 15 or 10 or 15 minutes? You can do that individually, and then in your breakouts discuss briefly, and then we'll discuss in the bigger group before we wrap up.
Yep, I will put into the breakout rooms, and then did everyone download the collaboration file? Yes, it's in the chat.
Yeah, I did. So then if then I can share, guys, with you. I will create a folder with all of the materials.
Okay. Then I'm opening the rooms, and here we go. Just work individually, and then you can discuss it in your teams. So please join those rooms, and then we can go from there. All right. Camila, Elise, please join. Please join your rooms.
Yeah, you almost need to have a very, I mean, you probably do already since you do the work, but very sophisticated negotiation and mediation skill.
Yes,
I don't know how
I would say yes.
sophisticated.
I think we're learning that continuously.
You're like a broker. You're brokering constantly.
Give me the volume.
I'm
Yes.
sorry?
I said, give me the beer.
Give me the beer. Yeah, right. So what things could you share with the groups based on sort of from the worksheet? That was kind of 1 or 2 things that, thoughts, or, Xavier, I appreciate what you said about this being kind of right in the heart of what you do. And what stood out?
Come on, don't be shy. We're almost done. The faster you speak, the faster we out. So come on.
Right. I didn't want to say that, but yeah.
We talked about how important and how good it feels to connect with the team, but how we don't put it in our agendas, and then we're mostly results and task oriented, and sometimes that's a pressure. But on the other side, to talk about more softer things can be scary, and we were saying that you just have to do it and try, and then let's see what works, what doesn't, but just put some time on it, because it really helps. And Lawrence was sharing exercises and experiences that were quite good, and when he was sharing them, you could see him like light up. So it's good for us. We have to put it more in our day-to-day.
Yeah, looking back on those, it's fun to do, right? But I was describing my experience, and when you do that for the first time, or when you're not used to doing that often, it's not, because you don't know how it's gonna go, right? Okay, you touch like these topics, and you need to provide also some frame, right, so that the discussion is at least going into a certain direction. But yeah, it's a bit scary to do that the first time, but yeah, afterwards it was very rewarding, and I think it did a lot for the team atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
I do not hear anymore, but okay, they cannot confirm.
And the last point which we also covered was that we would like to leave a legacy not only on the numbers, you know, that what you delivered as the KPIs and SLAs and all sorts of business numbers, but as well the people development and, you know, how really you can look back and say, these are the talents and the people are actually really self-develop themselves into, I don't know, become new you or you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are all great thoughts on exactly what sort of what this is all about, right? It's about, you know, again, starting with you, Ivana, the last point you made about the legacy. What do you want to be known for? I mean, there's one thing to be known for the like you said, the results, but the legacy, you're going to be remembered by who you were as a person, right? And who you were as a mentor. You just talked about mentoring, who you were as a leader. People follow leaders who are powerful in those terms, really, more than it's the emotions. And we tend to like back to your point, Lawrence, about, you know, emotions. It's fearful to talk about it, right? We don't know what to do with it. What if someone is crying or someone is upset? Well, I don't know what to do. I don't want to go there, right? So it's safer emotionally for us even to not talk about them. But once we develop the language, the repertoire, the process, like in that worksheet, some of these behaviors are just very business behaviors, really, like having a retreat or having space when we talk about do check-in on the process. That's an emotional check-in, really, but you're not talking about it in terms of how, it's not therapy, right? It's not talking about it in terms of, you know, people kind of feeling sad or happy or anything. You talk about, you know, the work, how to do the work well so that we feel gratified, right? So this is what these behaviors kind of talk about. And these behaviors is what cultivates the emotional intelligence of the group, right? There's a lot of them in that worksheet. And, you know, it's basic, like, you know, Jose also said, is that, you know, the balance between maintenance and task functions in a team leadership, as you said, you know, checking how people are doing, in addition to how's the job going, you know, how have you done what you're supposed to be doing this week? Super powerful. So I have a homework for you to sort of work on, but let me share my screen to think about. I'll share my screen here, and then we can look over it. But you can choose one of the three homeworks, or do one of them, or do all three, or two, whatever. But one is, it depends on where you feel you want to stretch, right? The first one is this the balance between assertion and engagement. Like, to what extent are you overly assertive or overly engaging, or do you strike a good balance between the two? So the assignment will be for you to track your behavior in a week, in interactions with your colleagues, or in negotiating and doing your work, all that stuff. And keep track, keep a notebook or some other means to track how you approached it. Were you being assertive using I statements, stating what you need, being forceful, taking a position? And what instances were you talking about asking people how they're doing, trying to lean in and figure out what is their motivation, coming from a place of empathy, and backtrack the two. And then find a friend and talk with that friend. That friend could be your mentor at work, could be a coach, could be a friend that you go out with for beers, whatever it may be, someone you can trust to give you good feedback, and talk to them about it, about your balance. In an ideal world, we're going to have a balance of 50-50, right? It's not always like that. There are weeks when we're in one drive versus another, but in a balanced world, we want to be juggling or alternating between the two. So that would be your first homework. And then modify and adjust your behavior as you move forward from there. The second homework is to look at your own group behaviors. And this homework is around cultivating your own group emotional intelligence, right? So look at the worksheet, identify maybe one or two behaviors that you think the group is not doing, and think about whether you want to do them. So talk with your group about it. Do you want to give it a shot? You want to talk about why it's important to have this behavior? Does it not? Does it impact people's well-being, sense of belonging, to motivation, being empowered, all those sort of manifestations of positive emotions? And let's and think about your how you may go about what actions you might go to implement them in your group and do a check. And then the third homework, if you choose to do it, is to pick one of the, which is I think is the most difficult of the three, is the collaboration barriers you identified in the very beginning of this workshop. You talked about lack of prioritization, lack of resources, unnecessary escalations, lack of target setting, organizational politics, company politics that get in the way, communicating in silos, even having different time zones, the lack of alignment and the cultural differences. These were all barriers that you came up with as barriers to your own effective collaborations. So pick one of those and talk with others who might share your view, and talk about what kind of influence can you yield to propose a change. Is it safe to do so? And what would it take to start to bring down that barrier? So these would be kind of the three, if you are so inclined, some homework for you to think about before say the next big training that you go, and sort of to indicate some progress in that. Any questions or thoughts on this? Is it feasible to pick one of those three? Try to work on?
Yeah.
Okay. So just as wrap up here, and I need to give you a break and we need to end it, but if you could maybe have 1, 2, or even 3 takeaways, let's say keep it to 1 since we're running out of time here, but 1 takeaway from this workshop that you would like to share, what would it be? I think that stood out for you.
Be the part of the psychological safety. That's super important. And slow down, take a moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivana. Others?
I think personally to me, the overall interest, right, is that people sometimes do not state their interest, they state their position. And I think that having this understanding and trying to work it through the other way is just another reminder that sometimes it is much more than just, than just juggling the words. It's much more complicated. It's much more involved sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I should give you a break. So it's 10, 12 my time. So I will stop here and thank you, Vlas. And thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry I went over. I hope this was helpful to you.